Everyone, and welcome back. This is Mindy Egan for My Favorite Things, and in today's video we are going to be doing some Copic coloring and creating a nighttime sky. First, I'm going to start off with stamping my image. I am using this image from Sweet Little Spell, and I'm stamping this on 80-pound white cardstock. Since I haven't used this stamp set before, I'm going to condition it. So I'm just taking my hand and pressing it all over the stamp set. That's just going to remove any residual residue that might be on there, and it's going to give me a crisper image. You could also just take a cloth and clean it first or prep it with a Versamark. So I am stamping my image in the MFT Extreme Black ink since this is Copic friendly ink. Now I can work on coloring in my image. Starting with the skin, I am using E04, E11, E21, and E01. This is my go-to color combination whenever I'm coloring skin, and I added the shadow area or the darkest color right under the hairline, and then I'm adding just little bits of color to the hands. Since those are pretty small, you don't really have to worry about a lot of shading. Then I'll move on to coloring the hair. I am using E18, E19, and E17. I actually forgot when I first kind of started coloring with this color combination that E18 is darker than E19. I switched those two around when I first started, but I went back over it to deepen those shadow areas, so I don't think it really made a big difference. Now my main shadow areas that I'm adding are right under the hat, and then any hair that's overlapping, I'm adding a little bit of shadow. And then, for instance, the hair that's right behind the arm, I added some shadow area, and right up from the little twisties. Now I'm going back in and just deepening up those shadow areas a little bit. So that way it's going to leave me a nice highlight right in the middle. For the boots, I'm just using a two-color combination, which is E27 and 25. I noticed that I forgot a little bit of the hair, so I will go back in and quickly color that in. My sweet little witch had to have a black cat, so I'm going to color that in with N8, N6, and N4. I just have the darkest color of the cat right next to where the cape is, so that since it's behind it, that's where I'm going to make the shadow area. I also used one of those colors to color in the bottom of the boot and the inside of the cape, and then bringing in an R21 for the ears and the nose of the cat. Now, one thing I didn't notice right away until I stamped with, so there's a little frog at the top of the hat, which I thought was super cute. So I colored that in with G19, 14, and 12, added some color to the broom using Y32 and Y35, and now I can work on coloring her cape or her dress, however you want to look at it. For the cape and the gown, I am using kind of a different shade of purple than I would normally use. That is going to be BV08, 04, 13, and 02. I wasn't sure exactly what side of the card or where she would be on my card just yet, so I'm going to add my darkest color to both sides of the hat, making the highlight in the center. If you were really planning out your card and you knew exactly where your light source would be, then you would kind of change up where your darkest color would be. But at the time, this is just kind of my default to have the highlight in the center when I'm not really sure where that highlight or that light source is going to come from. So with that in mind, when it comes to coloring the entire cape here, I put the darkest shadow area on the left-hand side, and I'm going to blend that out towards the edge of the flap. Now I also added shadow area to the bottom of the cape there, kind of has a little piece of the fabric that's flipped up. So I added a little bit of shadow area there, and then just adding that highlight right on the very edge. So that way when I'm coming in to color the other side of the cape, I'm going to have my darkest color or that shadow area where that flap is overlapping on the gown. So right here, I added the shadow right at the bottom of the arm, and then I'm drawing a line where that cape is overlapping. If you're not familiar with shadow areas or light source, that's totally okay. In my opinion, as long as you have kind of a gradual change of color from dark to light, I think it's great. To me, that just having that gradual change is enough to give it shape. So you really don't have to focus too much. These are always things that are just in the back of my head of what's overlapping where. Then I'll take the coordinating die, hold it in place with low tack tape, and run this through my die cut machine. And then I can take my pokey tool and just pop out any of those inside pieces. To do my background, I'm going to be using a piece of white cardstock that I already have trimmed down, I think, to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And I am using this moon stencil from Tumbled. Now, you don't have to have a moon stencil. I had just recently purchased this and thought it would be a perfect fit for my little scene here. But you could just take a circle die and die cut it out of some masking paper, and that would work just as well. I just really loved the detail of this moon and couldn't wait to put it to use. So I took the biggest moon out of it. This is the masking part. So we're masking off where our moon is going to go. And I'm just taking some low tack tape, folding it up and putting that behind the moon. I used to use some repositionable or removable dot adhesive, but I noticed that left quite a bit of residue on my moon area. So tape is going to work perfectly for me. And we're masking off that moon area so we can ink blend our sky or our background. I'm starting off by ink blending Tumbled glass, and I'm going to apply this to the entire area. When you are ink blending, the colors blend better when you saturate your paper with ink. It doesn't have to be soaking wet, obviously, but the more ink you have on here, the better your colors are going to blend. And the oxides are really great for blending. They just seem to blend really well together. So after the Tumbled glass, I came in with Blueprint Sketch, left a little bit of that Tumbled glass halo around the moon. Now I'm coming in with black soot and going around just those very outer edges. Next, I'll go back through those colors again. And here's the trick to getting this halo around the moon. So I'm coming back to that Blueprint Sketch, going over that line of the black soot. And now notice how I'm using my blending tool. I am literally kind of creating that circle. I'm not doing, how do I say that? I'm not going in circular motions with the blending tool. I'm literally tracing that around the moon. That is what's going to give it that realistic halo. So then I come back in with the Tumbled glass and I do that same thing. I'm just going in the motion or in the shape of the moon to give it that halo. I'm sorry if that sounded confusing. I'm still a little sick, so my words aren't forming as I want them to. Once I have that background done, I can remove my moon. I'm leaving the tape on there because I am going to use that mask again. And even this right here, if you were to just die cut a circle and create your own mask, this right here would be perfect. You don't even have to add anything else to this. So all I'm doing here is rubbing my finger over that area to remove any residual adhesive that might be stuck there from my tape. There wasn't a lot, but I want to make sure it's gone because otherwise my ink blending is not going to look right on it. Now I'm coming in with antique linen, and I went very, very light over that. I just wanted to give it a light coat of color. Now I'm bringing in the stencil for the moon, and this just adds detail to the moon. You could also do this by just flicking water onto the moon background there. And I'm once again bringing antique linen, just lightly going over those areas. I didn't want it to really stick out from the card. I just wanted a light application of color. I wanted to ground my image a little bit, so I needed something for my witch to stand on. So I'm bringing in the Slimline Grassy Edges stencil, and I'm holding that down on my Make Art Station. So I have this grassy border at the bottom of my card. And I'm just going to ink blend on some black soot. And I'm giving this a heavy layer of black ink because I wanted to cover that moon stencil and kind of hide the background there a little bit. So heavy application of black soot. Once I have that done, I can remove my grassy stencil, and I'm going to bring in that circle mask again and place that right over the top of the moon. I want to add some stars to the background, and I didn't want to do it before because then I'd have to wait for it to dry. I'd risk smearing it. So doing it here at the end is a lot better for me. Now, this grassy edges doesn't quite line up to mask off my grass, but I don't need it to line up perfectly. I just need it to kind of block off my grass there a little bit because I don't want to add stars to my grass. Then I have the Starry Colors. This is the Gonzai Tombi set. I added a couple drops of water to the white and one of the gold colors, and I mixed that together and applied that to an acrylic block, and I'm just flicking that onto my background with a paintbrush. Then I can bring in that white and do the same thing. I'm just picking up some of that ink, applying it to an acrylic block, and flicking that onto the background. Once I have enough stars on my background, I can carefully remove my masks, And I did have a little bit of a glob there. I just picked it up with a paper towel, but that's where my witch is going to go. So I wasn't too worried about that bigger sized star there. So I'm carefully removing the mask, and there might be a little bit of stickiness left over because I was pushing down on that circle a little bit. So I'm just going to carefully remove that. You can always rub your finger over that or take one of those erasers to move any stickiness. So I'm bringing this over to my Misty tool after the background is dry, and I'm lining up a sentiment onto my card front. I already had placed my image about where she would go, so I knew where the sentiment would be, and I'm using a Misty corner to make sure that that's lined up straight. I wasn't quite trusting my judgment at that time, so I'm bringing in a transparency grid sheet and stamping on that, and then I can check the lines and make sure it's straight. Then I just wipe off that ink and I can stamp directly onto the background. Now I like to use a VersaFine black ink when I'm stamping on top of Distress Oxide ink. That's going to give me really crisp black lines for my sentiment. I'm going to add a little bit of dimension to my card. So I'm adding some foam tape behind my panel, and then I can attach this to a card front that I have cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So it's going to leave a really nice white border around my edge. And I think that really helps kind of make the background pop just a little bit more, shows the intensity of that colors. I also added foam squares behind my little witch here, and then I can pop her up on the front of my card. I thought I would try something new. I wanted to add a little bit of detail and sparkle to my little witch here. So I am taking a white Jelly Roll pen, and I think this is 10 point. I started out by drawing an actual star, so I think it had like, I don't know, I had a bunch of lines there. It was the first one I did. It didn't look right. So I just settled for adding a bunch of dots. Once I have that entire dress kind of covered so it looks like it's sparkly, I'm going to pick out a few of them, and I'm just going to draw across. So I'm making one line longer than the other. The vertical line is going to be the longest one. The horizontal I'm going to make a little shorter, and it creates kind of that extra sparkle. Now you can see I have that big one right up there on top of the hat. I was going to leave it, but it was just really bothering me how it was sticking out like a sore thumb. I thought about adding an embellishment to it, but I really didn't have anything in my stash that would work. So I decided to come back in with my Jelly Roll pen, and I just extended the lines. So it is a super bright, sparkly spot on her hat. So I just did vertical and horizontal, and I think that worked out better. That finishes up my card for today. I had so much fun making this card. I hope you enjoyed it too. Thank you so much for stopping by today, and I'll see you again soon.